Welcome everyone to today's Mediate.com online mediation training forum. This is in fact the fourth out of six weekly forums that we're hosting to consider really fascinating issues of both online mediation and the training of mediation online, both for online mediation and face-to-face mediation. My name is Jim Malamed. I'm one of the founders of Mediate.com and the board chair, and I am going to toss things quickly to our CEO, Colin Rule, and our VP, Claire Fowler, just to touch base on a few administrative and technical aspects, and then I'll be right back to you.
Okay. Colin, why don't I take first crack at it, and then I'll hand it to you for polling info.
That sounds great.
Okie dokie. So, hello, I'm Claire, and a couple of the obvious pieces. So, for the most part, it probably makes sense for you to stay muted just to, avoid the random barking dog in the background, because we are going to be recording this. We would love it if you could keep your videos on so we can see all of your lovely smiling faces. And we anticipate, especially with this topic and with this group, that this will be a very dynamic chat. So we have a couple of chat moderators. As you pose a question, we'll be answering it if we can, and if not, we have been given full permission to interrupt all of our presenters at the right time and pose your questions to them. So please jump into the chat with any resources that you feel are relevant, any questions that you want to ask. We will be happy to field those. We'll be monitoring it. And we are going to be sharing this recording afterwards, as well as the transcript from the chat. So any resources that you share in the chat will be shared with everybody who's watching the recording session later on. We do have interpretation available. So down in the bottom right there, you can see interpretation. Select if you would like this to be interpreted into Portuguese, you can select that as an option. And we have really amazing interpreters that have just been incredible throughout this forum. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Colin, should we jump in with polling now, or should we save that for a second?
I don't know, Tricia, what do you think? The poll is ready to go. Should we share it with everyone, or should we wait a little bit? Oh, we're on. You're
muted, Tricia.
I did that on purpose, right? Yeah, let's go ahead with the poll and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's give it a shot. So this is a cool feature of Zoom. I'm going to click Launch Polling, and hopefully everyone is now seeing some poll questions here. So please give us your feedback. We have 80 people now viewing the question, so I can see what percentage is voted. So take a swing.
I'm not
here.
seeing the poll.
Is it not there? Does anybody else see the poll?
I can see it.
I can see it.
Yep.
I can see.
Some devices are a little bit more friendly than others.
Great.
But I completed it and I hit submit and it doesn't go. So the submit button doesn't respond.
Oh,
I had the same response.
Yeah.
Jim, didn't some of us answer this the other day? Should we answer it again or not?
I think you should answer it again.
Mm-hmm.
Do it again? Okay.
Yeah, I see we have about 10 responses now. About 12% have responded, and I'm seeing the results. So once I end it, I can share the results with everybody, and then we can see all.
Colin, my submit button isn't live.
Keep
Right.
scrolling.
I wonder if it's, you have to go scroll through all of the
Exactly.
items.
Mm-hmm.
You only see the first two on the screen. If you scroll through all of them, then the submit button alights.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thank you, Mary.
Okay, well,
Thank
that
you.
helps.
This is such a wonderful example of so many things, both how there's risk of technology getting in the way, but also the benefits of groupthink, and people being able to put their minds together, maybe even as a preamble to our mediations, figuring out some of the technical stuff.
Well, I've certainly been to a lot of trainings that start out with people calling up ideas and writing them on flip charts, and people coming up with colored dots and putting them there. You know, that can take 45 minutes, an hour. It's
Mhm.
amazing to think we have 87 participants. We've already got 60% of people who voted. And in a minute, I can click a button and it's all synthesized. And there it was. And it only took a
Mhm.
couple minutes.
Yeah.
So we now got 60% of people voted. Now we're at 65%.
And
So I
just
don't know if we
let
want to
you
wait
know-
until we get to 100. Tim, did
Colin,
you?
can I get it again? Because I lost it somehow.
Sorry, I don't know.
Well,
I don't have
I
any.
answered it previously in any event, so.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Well,
Just to
Tricia-
let you know, Colin, it did show up on my screen. It was just on my other screen and I was looking at this screen.
Okay, all right, well,
Got it.
that's great. We're sorting out all the issues. That's good to know.
You're a man of integrity, Tim.
Yeah. And Sandy, are you sure that you've answered all of the questions?
Still can't get past submit.
Yeah.
Hi, David, good morning.
Well,
I've
we
been to
did
Humble,
have,
Texas.
yeah, welcome Humble. We did have about 70 folks that filled out the pre-forum survey that had some of these
Mhm.
questions in it. We were
Mhm.
just trying to give people a chance who were showing up and who didn't necessarily fill that out to go ahead and answer that, but
Right,
Yeah.
and we do
Yeah.
have 75% of people have responded. So whenever you're ready, Tricia, we can close it up and share the results.
yeah, why don't we go ahead and, because I think this will give us a good flavor of who's in the room.
Absolutely.
I think you're right. Okay, so I'm going to end polling. And now I'm going to share results. So hopefully you can view the poll results now.
Great, excellent. And I think just a real quick comment that these poll results are again very similar to ones that we got from the pre-forum survey. And just 2 quick points to make, and we'll come back to it later on. We have a lot of people here who have experience in a number of ADR processes, but obviously centrally mediation. Probably more important, I think, for all of our wonderful presenters today, we have people who are coming here with a number of different primary areas of practice. So there are so many things to talk about in experiential training and mentorship across these various areas. And we've also got people who are spending a lot of time and effort in ongoing post-training learning processes, which is fantastic because that means for us, we invite you to share your experiences and your wisdom with us throughout today. And a good number of you have done that work online. And we have a mixed response in terms of effectiveness. And again, that'll give us a lot to talk about. So Colin and Claire, thank you for getting that poll up and running. I think we've got a good sense of the kinds of conversations we're going to be able to have with you today. So
Great.
thank you
So
again.
I'm going to stop sharing the results.
All right.
Colin, can you see if you can save the poll results? And if so, we can export those and save those as part of the forum.
You got it.
materials.
I've downloaded them and we can share them later.
Wow, I'll bet the public policy mediators are just going crazy now looking. Donna, can I get a couple thumbs up from you for live polling and interactivity? I mean, that's pretty slick and pretty
Yeah,
cool.
we like to use those. But as a public policy mediator, I just want to note there wasn't a choice for me. So I chose some other choices there. Because it
So,
wasn't letting me submit. So that might have been part of why people weren't submitting through.
so let me reshare my screen just to get through with a little intro piece. I'll toss it to Woody and we'll get right into the program. Tricia, is that okay with you?
That sounds good.
Good. All right. We'll see if this. All right. And Colin, can you see a screen share there? You can. Okay. Oh God, did I share the right thing? Oh, I shared the PDF. All right. It looks like it's working. All right. Everybody's going to be introducing folks downstream. I'll be introducing Woody and Woody will introduce Tricia. And then we've got quite a panel. And so I'm not going to take time with that. I want to say I put this file both on the main forum webpage and also in the chat. And all these links work. That's the main reason I gave it to you. So if you want to drill down, notice the main task force website at mediate/online training. We've got Woody as the wonderful task force chair. We've got an 11-member executive committee. We've got a 28-member advisory board, and this doesn't even include all the committee folks. We've got 11 different task force committees. And we've got 6 total forums. The first 3 have taken place, been recorded, and are posted. You can even link to them right here on the PDF, and you can see today's forum as well as the next 2. So here's my main questions, because my belief is that everything changed last March, that suddenly all mediation was basically being done online. And not only that, all mediation training was basically being done online. And that's really true today. And my impression is that while people are eager to get back to the face-to-face, that the world has changed, and that now online mediation, online training will be much more vital and a part of every mediator's experience. And while there was a sudden Zoom revolution, I do want us to also recognize that there have also been about 35 years of development of online mediation, starting with people getting email addresses and websites and contact forms and everything else. And I want to highlight that the standards for training and qualification that have historically been put in place didn't even pay attention to the world of the internet. It was probably like fast mail, at that time, or a brochure that you don't have to print was the thinking. But the reality now is that the internet and online communications is kind of the air we breathe and the ocean we swim in, certainly for educating people and gaining access to cases and services, education, etc. And so my first question is there an online mediation curriculum that all mediators should reasonably know? And of course, that would evolve over time. And how might we define and implement that? And I think, for example, should 30 and 40-hour trainings be renovated? Because pretty much the internet impacts every facet of how we communicate with people. Should there be an additional modular online mediation component? I think very possibly the answer is yes. Notice how easy it is for us to do things like monthly webinars now, and to have cohort learning groups, and to not only learn, but build professional community. And nobody has to even get in their car or often pay for these opportunities. And then I am so excited about the possibility of deeper and more extended mentorships and the like. So that's the first question. What do we do about all this online mediation content or curriculum? Next, how can we most effectively train mediators online? And I'm talking both about training people to do online mediation and training them to do face-to-face mediation. I would offer, I think it would be presumptuous to tell online mediators that you need to get your training face-to-face. And it would also be stupid to tell face-to-face mediators that you need to limit your training to face-to-face. Why wouldn't you want more and better and the best that is available in a cumulative way? And then finally, I have the question, could a mediator who's interested in making a living, in fact, achieve all of their required training online? If they're only interested in doing online mediation, I think it's kind of hard to say no to that. And the implications are massive when you think about the growth of mediation and serving underserved communities and growing mediation globally. And as to online education, I think there's also a fascinating issue of how much needs to be live and how much might be recorded. And I think there might be a measure of both. So that is really my burning questions about all of this. And I just see this as a renaissance for mediation and really a game changer, that we have such ease of communications with regard to professional development and training. And that if we can really figure out best and most meaningful and most helpful practices, we can change the world, literally. And so with that, I want to introduce Woody. Woody, you're going to want to unmute, I know, thank you. And Woody has been a prince throughout this process. I also want to compliment the committee chairs and the other forum coordinators. Minimally, we're putting together an unbelievable corpus of valuable information. And I think by synthesizing it and filtering it, we may really be able to come with some very helpful direction to take mediation to the next step. Woody, thank you so much for what you do.
Jim, if we all look around, it's like at a Hall of Fame of mediators and trainers. I see colleagues that I will learn from any day. And I think of people like Wendy Foxman and Ken Newman and Colm Brannigan, people who have been giving and giving and giving for decades. And it's now going to be easier, as Jim said so eloquently, for newer mediators and experienced mediators to benefit from that wisdom much easier and with less cost. The forums have really exceeded our expectations, and frankly, they were really high to begin with. But this week and next week are particularly important for me because it's really personal. This is my life, and what Trish and her all-star cast will be discussing is what I do every day. And I just want to put my own flesh and soul into what Jim was saying from a policy standpoint. As many of you know, I teach at UCLA at the law school, and we have a J term. J term means it's sticking in some classes between fall and spring. Well, every year we have kind of low attendance because all of our students are on the ski slopes. They don't want to be back at campus. This year, they could be on the slope and attend my class, Lawyer as Peacemaker, all in one day, and get their course credit and never miss a beat. Then we have trainings, and not just that all of us have spent several light years on airplanes, and our retirement on costs, airfare and hotels, etc., that we don't have to do now. But in the trainings, not only do we get participants who may never have accessed it before because of the ease, but we get the finest trainers who don't have to make a choice on their commitments. We can bring them in for 15 minutes in a cameo or have them do a module, and then they're out again. But our participants get the benefit of that wisdom. And then we're talking about mentorship. And first of all, you must read Michael Lang's paper. It is the must-read piece of this task force on this issue. And he did it specifically for this task force, and he'll talk about it more later. But there are groups that many of you belong to and many of you lead that can meet monthly, that can meet weekly. You can limit the number of in your groups so you have very vibrant and intimate discussions, and you can expand it out or make it one-on-one. And all of this is now possible. And Trish has put together a program that I think will set a research agenda for all of us for many years to come. So I'm just going to say a few words about Trish and get out of the way. So she and all of the members of her 2 committees, she doesn't just chair one, but she chairs both the mentorship and the experiential learning committee. And if I tried to read her bio, it would take the 2 hours. So just a couple of things. First of all, she carries on the tremendous tradition at Temple University of being a leader in dispute resolution. And she's a professor at the Department of Communications. She's only written 8 books and 75 articles. My favorite of her books is Stories and Strategies for Making Peace in Our Schools. If you've ever worked with Trish, you don't even have to say the words. Just start the thought, and all of a sudden, Trish has created a program. And so that's what you're going to see today. Trish, thanks so much. I know you're, in addition to being prolific, you're incredibly modest. So we can all just give you the appreciation that you won't ask for yourself. Thank you, Trish.
Thank you, Woody. Thank you so much. And I just want to say it's first and foremost such a great opportunity to thank Jim and Woody for making this happen. This is an amazing learning experience. And I know a number of the members of the executive committee and have been presenters in the forum before this one. You know, to be able to talk with people around the world about the next, literally the next generation of thinking. And Woody, I love your term wisdom, right? Because what we're about is really trying to grow the wisdom of the work that we do as mediators and conflict managers and peacemakers. And so what you've done to get this going, to get this off the ground is absolutely amazing. And I know that this is just the beginning. So kudos to both of you. I also want to say that I am not alone in this endeavor, so that everything, if you like it about today's program, I want you to look and find the picture of Michael Lang. Michael is there, and he's going to obviously be helping me throughout today's session in welcoming our presenters and sharing their thoughts and their experiences with you. But this has been like the smoothest 3-legged race I've ever run. Right? It has been lockstep. It's felt like we were waltzing rather than running. And it really is wonderful. So I just want to give a huge shout out to Michael before we start. And I definitely am going to look forward to all of his contributions and leadership as we move forward. So I'm going to ask Colin and Claire as we get started. If I am co-host, can I go ahead and share my screen? And just check in real quickly to make sure that that's happening. And if so, I'll go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint.
All set.
All right. All right. Let me go ahead and get this up. First of all, want to say that I think the blend of these 2 subcommittees has just been really generative, because when we're talking about what we know works in our learning processes and in our experiential training, and we partner that with the ideas and the opportunities for mentorship, I think we're starting to talk about a sophistication of practice and education that might not have been possible as quickly. I think, Jim, your comments were so on track in terms of what we're living through and what we've lived through in the last year and a half provides us with not only the necessity, but the opportunity to do some really wonderful things. For those of you who have joined us since the very beginning of our session today, we really want this to be about you and with you, as well as with our presenters. So if you haven't already taken an opportunity to chat where you're from and the kind of work that you do, we'd really welcome you to do that. We do have a bit of an ambitious program for you today, and we like that because this is an ambitious group, right? We're about getting things done and making things happen. We are already kind of talking about our experiences in learning, and we've already had an opportunity to do a little bit of polling. We're going to talk a little bit about that, so that for those of you who filled out the pre-forum survey, we'll touch base on just a couple of items that is going to be available to you later on. We're leaving it open for a while to let people fill it in. And then we have got this amazing panel of presenters. I mean, this is the who's who of presenters. And that panel is going to talk about their best practice in terms of the areas of work that they do. We're going to introduce all of them in more detail a little bit later, but just as a quick overview, we have Dan Koss from the New York Unified Court Systems Office of Alternative Dispute Resolution. We have Doug Frankel, who is the Morris M. Schuster Professor of Practice at University of Pennsylvania Law School. We have Mary Hansen, who is one of the preeminent trainers and program designers in ADR and mediation, and heads up and consults with the Department of Navy, as well as 11 or 12 other federal agencies at this point. We also have, Michael is going to be sharing with us a little bit of an overview about the work in reflective practice and mentorship. And then we're going to hear from Tricia Draves about her really compelling work with mentorship programs for mediators who work in homeless populations in San Francisco. That, quite frankly, Tricia, is one of those that I would love to have had an hour just to be able to have a cup of coffee online with you. We're going to get an opportunity to hear from Susan Terry, who has started the Orion program for mentoring mediators in family situations. And of course, John Settle, who has done so much work in workplace conflict management and mediation. Then we're going to shift it to a panel discussion that Woody's going to facilitate, which is really having all those presenters kind of step back from sharing their experiences and best practices to talking about, so what are the opportunities and challenges for online learning processes above and beyond what they've already shared with us? And especially throughout the program, but on that panel discussion, we're going to really encourage you to share with us your thoughts in chat so that we can have this conversation happening on different levels. And then it's your turn. And the last 15 or 20 minutes of our day today, we are going to put you in breakout rooms and ask you to share your thoughts with your colleagues about visioning optimal online learning processes for post-training learning. And then we'll wrap it up and go on to next steps. So I think that the questions that we are dealing with right now are among the most important questions that we can be asking ourselves, because we're really grappling with the issues of, how do we learn and how do we help others learn so that we can grow and nurture and continue to support not only the field, but the work that we do that is so absolutely essential. And I must claim a bit of a bias here because in my background, I did not start out in terms of education, but about halfway through my career of 40 years or so as a mediator and a conflict coach and a consultant, I fell in love with the idea of conflict resolution education. And how do we think about learning processes so we bring this to younger generations? And I'll say a tiny bit more about that later on as we go forward. But as we look at the opportunity to think about revisiting how we learn to do the things that are critical, our mediation, our conflict coaching, et cetera, how do we transfer that learning to the work that we do? So walk out with that wisdom and put that wisdom into practice. How do we scaffold the learning we do across our career? A lot of us in this room have a couple of decades or more of experience of reflecting back on where we've been as learners and teachers and peacemakers and where we're going. And I think that scaffolding question, is one of the great insights that we are going to bring to our work. And last but not least, how does this online technology optimize all of that work? All right. Earlier, we already did the polls. And so we're going to move beyond that. I do want to mention that for the pre-form survey, we had a couple of interesting results. We're not going to go deeply into the weeds on this. Just want to mention a couple of things. You'll have an opportunity to get that survey if you'd like to have it in terms of the results printout. And of course, it'll be part of what's posted on the committee websites later on. One of the things that was really striking to me is you look at this first question about what are people's online learning experiences post initial training. We are a rich field. We have a very high percentage of people who are constantly engaged in online learning initiatives, whether it be internships and apprenticeships, mentorships, ongoing group learning, etc. That, to me, is hopeful. One of the things it also is a responsibility. So as we look at this and talk about this amongst ourselves, are we capturing this learning richness and putting it forward for other people? And I think that's a question that we can talk about. A lot of this learning is going throughout the career, longer than 5 years for many people, not just initially at the beginning of their career, which again, I think suggests that we are able to look at a number of different impacts that people have as they grow with this. And not surprisingly, people feel that their experiences have, for the most part, been very effective or effective. And a second question on this survey, which we don't have on slide, asked about how you see your experiences with online learning in these post-training situations. And it's important to kind of note that just as our poll in the very beginning of today's session suggested, there are more questions about how effective the online mode is. And so if we want to continue people's looking forward to these post-training experiences, how are we able to craft the online experience so that it meets those needs and it is seen as effective as the in-person? Couple of cautionary comments. And when I was a young girl and my mother would take us for a long drive to go visit the grandparents, her secret was that she would stop at a 5 and 10. I'm old enough to remember the 5 and 10 stores, right? The Woolworths. And she would make a 59-cent investment in a 100-page book of Connect the Dots. And she would hand it to me with a pencil. And that was good for a couple of hours at least, right? And so one of the things that I think we can do is connect the dots as well as expand the perspective. And that's kind of one of the hopes that we have for today. Let me just mention that, and this links so nicely in terms of some of the work that we've already seen in the preceding forum. How can we be thinking more globally about the work we're doing in post-training learning processes? Tara and her colleagues in the very first forum were talking about global development issues. And throughout that forum, I was just writing copious notes about how amazing that is, that we are living in this situation, and how are we putting together this explosion of our field globally with these ongoing post-training learning experiences. How can we be thinking more cumulatively? And by that, I mean, how are we looking at how these learning experiences compound our wisdom over different learning events and different aspects of life and career development? I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to that, but I certainly think it's a compelling question. And how should that line up with the compelling arc of the professional development? Do we have an idea of how we would say to a young person coming into our field, if you think about the possibilities ahead of you, here are ways that you can be thinking about crafting that professional development throughout your career so that you really are able to get as much out of it as possible. Thinking comparatively and strategically, not every one of these post-training learning environments is the right fit or as effective as others. And last but not least, how can we be thinking more culturally? And by that, and I know some of our presenters are going to be talking about issues of culture and cultural sensitivity today, but really thinking carefully about what does learning mean culturally? What are the cultural influences and aspects of learning processes, and how do those translate as well into some of the other learning situations that we're going to see in terms of post-training? So incredible richness. we're about ready to start learning from the real experts, the presenters that we have for you. I want to start before we go into presenters from kind of the experiential training group and that are speaking to those issues of that subcommittee. And I just want to thank all the members of the subcommittee for all of the work and the time that they have put into this, and the wisdom and the work they've done in their careers. It's really added to this. So we are going to begin our presenters with someone who has consistently amazed me, and I've been fortunate to work with him for about 6 or 7 years now. Dan Koss is the Assistant Statewide ADR Coordinator of the New York State Unified Court Systems Office of Alternative Dispute Resolution Programs. And Dan is going to share his work and what New York has done so well in building a very impressive dispute resolution initiative. So Dan, I will drive the slides and you just tell me when to move it forward.
Yep. Thanks so much, Trish. If you wouldn't mind hitting the next slide so you don't have to see that picture of me there. I want to thank you, Trish, and Woody and Jim for including me today and for including the community mediation perspective. Here in New York State, because I know folks are calling in today from around the world, here in the northeast part of the country, we operate and have for the last 40 years a network of community mediation programs. And currently we have 20 organizations that are nonprofits. So I'm just going to give you a little context out of which my comments will be informed by. As a group, these organizations do about 25,000 to 30,000 cases a year, and in a wide variety of contexts, including court-referred contexts and family courts and surrogates courts and city courts, as well as community contexts, such as partnering with departments of social services, probation departments, housing advocacy organizations, and schools. And they also utilize a wide range of processes. So when I speak with you today, I'm going to be trying to speak generally because these practices extend to the work that we do to help develop the more than 750 volunteer mediators and 150 professional staff mediators here in New York State. Because what they do is a combination of mediation, conflict coaching, and restorative practices. And I'm definitely going to shout out one of my community mediation heroes who's on the call. I saw Mark Kleinman from Queens, New York. Hi, Mark, I'm glad you're here. Learned a lot from Mark, and I've just had the privilege of learning a lot from so many really talented people over the last 15 years as I've helped to oversee this network. And I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, Trish. Because what we want to highlight is that there is a range of practices that we put in the best practices bucket, irregardless of whether we're talking online or in person. What we've observed is that there is a combination of different methods that people use. I won't say that every one of our mediation centers does all of these things, but every mediation center does at least several of these things to help support the development of their staff and volunteers. So I'm just going to walk through these few bullets and make sure I don't go over on my time. So the first here is the development of learning communities. We believe that people learn best in community and in relation to each other, learn from each other, and that community is actually what creates the safety that people need to take risks and learn and be open to new things. So whether that's the initial training or any future trainings or apprenticeships, community development, community building and relationships are critical. We've had apprenticeship processes for many years here. They include a combination of case observation, practice on case simulation, so AKA role plays, co-practice on live cases, so that's novice with experienced mediator, co-mediating live cases, and solo practice with professional observation. If we had more time, I would give you a sense of the difference of what we think about feedback and debrief, that we consider them two pretty different processes in the learning stages. And so we kind of tie those to specific practices. And then a few more things to share here would be the culture of peer debrief and co-mediation. It comes from a quality assurance mindset that I think is possible in an organizational setting. And so that is something that many of our centers have established, that it is the norm after casework for mediators to talk to each other about the case and to learn from each other's practices, and sometimes to set each other straight if that's needed. Having learners have a voice in what they would like to learn, because usually our volunteers are, I was just interviewing a bunch of very experienced volunteers, 30+ years, and they're having a voice in what they need and how they want to continue to develop is critical in building the buy-in for ongoing learning. Ongoing case observation, and what I mean by that is that the staff and volunteers are regularly observed by someone and evaluated according to a checklist that's based on the local standards of practice. We don't all mediate the same way. Our checklists need to be different. And so that's an organization to organization difference, but ongoing case observation, because what we find is over time, people's practice develops and sometimes not in the most desirable way. And finally, all casework includes a combination of pre-brief and or post-case debrief. There's nothing worse than not being ready for a case because you didn't pre-brief, and there's nothing like a learning opportunity squandered by not having a chance to talk about it, both just to move and get some of the stuff out of the system, but to learn from what could have been done better. So those, I think, are our core practices. And Trish, I'll cover the other pieces when we do our online version, because I think that's the best place to introduce these.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Dan. All right. So now we have the pleasure of listening to Doug Frankel, who is the Moore Schuster Practice Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Carey School of Law. Has, for 20 years created and crafted that program, which is just a gem, an absolute star. Is also a prolific author and has written a great deal in terms of the questions of, how do we think about our learning processes and put them into play in a variety of contexts. Doug's bio is, going to post it on the website materials, but in terms of time, I just want to turn it over and let you share your thoughts about the work that you do, Doug, and some of the best practices that you have identified.
Okay, thank you to everybody who put this together, and thanks, Tricia. Let me say a couple of things about the assumptions or premises of the points I'm going to make. Number one, perhaps obviously, I teach in law school courses. That means we're training people who are going to be lawyers and not principally mediators, but they want to study about mediation. And they're doing it in contrast to what Woody described. Most of my students and students in most schools are doing it in courses that consume an entire semester, if not an entire year. That has some implications for how we go about doing this and what might be considered best practice. Courses are taught in law schools either in simulation or in using real case fieldwork vehicles or some combination of them. And I'll advert to both. And sometimes those are mixed together. The real case clinical courses tend to have a heavy emphasis on working with lower or low income disputants, so not exclusively those members of society. But they also have access to cases involving lawyers and legal representation. And so those represent choices to the teacher who's organizing a course like this. So I must also put out a disclaimer. What I'm about to say in a kind of bullet point format is not so much best practices, but while I have been teaching mediation for 35 years, I have taught it online for exactly 12 weeks. So you're going to have to, although I practiced for longer than that online, but you have to you may want to take this with that with that in mind. Okay. What are some of the do's or perhaps don'ts that I've come away with in thinking about online teaching of mediation in the law school context? The first is, if possible, I think longer learning is preferable to compressed learning. Or to put it another way, if given a choice, I would rather teach over an entire semester than over, say, 40 weeks, 40 hours, whether that's in 1 week or 2 weeks, because this is a course that ideally involves reading, experience, discussion, and reflection. I think the premise speaks for itself. Besides, in most law schools, students can't really do it. Woody gave a good example of a unique circumstance, but many law schools don't provide that opportunity, at least not currently. The other is obviously a question about Zoom fatigue. I cannot imagine what a classic 40-hour mediation training would look like, putting aside the goal of having students read and study the material in 5 days of 8 hours a day on the screen. How do I go about it? I go about the training part of my courses in about 9 sessions of about 3 hours each. There's considerable reading for each of them, but I've added a bunch of asynchronous teaching to cut those 3 hours sometimes down to 2. What does asynchronous teaching look like in law schools? Students watching video, perhaps with a lecturette accompanying it, an out-of-class simulation with observation and debriefing, that sort of stuff. But the online world has placed an emphasis, and I think allowed us to improve on our simulation teaching. Some of the innovations that have been, I think, extremely valuable have involved what many schools have started to do, and I've been doing for many, many years. Number one, using actors or alumni, nationally or even internationally, as role players in simulation. Online training allows you to, while it may be very valuable for students to play roles of a party as well as a neutral in a mediation simulation, it's much more realistic to have a drama student or a professional actor or an alum who's at a law firm, or perhaps a student at another school in the US or overseas who's a stranger taking part in one of those roles. And online enables us to do that with some administration, but it's not impossible. My final words have to do with true clinical courses that involve real case experience in the law school context under faculty supervision. And some of this involves major headaches. Number one, don't underestimate the complexity of the combination of having to line up both technology and schedules. Well-resourced law schools may want to provide technology to parties who don't have it. Low-income clients often don't have access to laptops or iPads or other computers, or don't know or don't have great bandwidth. Well-resourced law schools are actually making those available to parties so they can take part in clinical experiences. That's a luxury, admittedly. Secondly, we found this semester, I found myself spending a third of my time as a glorified scheduling clerk, because in the old days, a real case clinical experience was scheduled by a court administrator and everybody showed up at the appointed time. Now, it takes the coordination of 4 or 5 people's schedules to make a mediation happen. And then when somebody's kid is sick and somebody asks for a postponement, it can be another several hours of rescheduling. So that's a major lesson to be learned. Substantively, and the last 2 things I want to say may be a little controversial. Number one, I think it's very important to devote considerable training or teaching in the course to pre-mediation contact. Books and training up to this point have assumed that mediations begin when everybody shows up as essential strangers in a room. That isn't how it happens online. And we have found that enormous gains can be made by training students and having them study what is and isn't productive to raise with disputants in contacts prior to a mediation. That also requires them to have an appreciation for what mediation can and cannot do, and to ask some hard questions about which they may have very little experiential base in terms of answering. And finally, I would suggest that online mediation training in the clinical context strongly suggests that the course adopt a pluralistic model of mediation practice rather than, as is often the case in many schools, favoring one, usually a facilitative or even transformative model, rather than teaching equally the practice of evaluative mediation, for example, and giving students the opportunity, indeed perhaps the necessity, to put that model into practice when they think it's appropriate. And why do I say that? I say that because for several reasons. First is the experience has shown us that online mediations generally are of a shorter duration than in-person mediations. When lawyers are present, or even when they're not, the shorter duration mediations limit the amount of and depth of information that can be gleaned or gathered, which in turn can really limit the ability of parties to reach the kinds of creative or interest-based solutions that a lot of courses idealize. Or to put it another way, there's a lot of hard bargaining that goes on in time-limited mediations, whether or not lawyers are present, and students need to be able to make good decisions about whether evaluative mediation might not be an appropriate intervention, which, by the way, as the research shows and which I've written about elsewhere, is true. But even if we weren't online, my strong feeling is that this being an academic course in mediation, students should be exposed to the broadest range of mediator styles or approaches or philosophies, and brought to a point where they can make their own good choices at the end of the course about what is the best approach to apply in particular situations. And ODR, or online dispute resolution, fosters that. So does the muting of screens, which may minimize the amount of emotional exchange that online processes produce. So there you have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I also just wanted to note that, Jim has put a couple of Doug's books in the chat, and they are amazing. Practice of Mediation, which is so valuable, and his book with Jim Stark. So go to those links and learn about more about what Doug has to share with us on that. The next presenter is somebody that I want to just say, she probably, I think, gets more out of every lived hour than anyone I have ever known in my life. Mary Hansen, who is the owner of Peninsula Mediation and ADR, and for many years has been able to help design and train the Department of Navy's ADR program, and works for a number of different federal agencies. And as I said, you probably take too long to even list all of them. It is just, an amazing trainer and thinker in this area. But I'm also going to let the cat out of the bag and tell you, you may be surprised to learn that she is also a tall ship sailor and an opera singer. So when you put that package together, it's pretty amazing. So Mary, I've given you the buildup you deserve.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, let's go to the real stuff that brings us here today. In 1996, there was a fundamental change in my areas of ADR practice. Prior to that time, I had been an advanced family mediator practitioner. Know many of you from that context. In years past, I did the clinical aspects of mediator training through a variety of court programs that I ran prior to 2000 for Marshall Wiss School of Law, College of William and Mary. And then the Administrative Dispute Resolution Act happened. And I thought, aha, finally, because my area was really organizational communication and conflict management. And I thought, finally, we're going to be able to have a focus of ADR in an area that actually aligns with my primary interests. And that's all things employment in the workplace. And so that act actually required federal agencies to adopt, implement, and report on their use of alternative means of dispute resolution in the federal workplace, things that were alternatives to formal administrative and legal processes. So in about 1997, I got involved in some pilot studies for a federal agency, and it was really the game changer for me. And at that time, I need to note that at that time, there were no standards for who would do this work. And so I started doing this work at a time when there was no program, when there was
following the leader
of who, who the provider needed to be. That's very, very different now. So, I think currently we're beyond just mediation. I think many agencies started fulfilling their ADRA mandates with the use of mediation, certainly with things like partnership councils and those kinds of things. But now I think the predominant, at least for the federal workplace, are still mediation, but broadened beyond that to other useful processes, because not all problems are managed or resolved through mediation. You've got group facilitation, ombuds certainly is there, huge growth in ombuds, and conflict coaching, an intervention for one, where people have the opportunity to gain insight into their own conflict behavior, analyze their problems, develop skills to move forward. And we can go to the next slide. What we're seeing, and I know this is something that many of my colleagues, including Tricia and I, have talked about over the years, is that we have an aging pool of qualified providers. And in the context of programs that have been operating for 25 years, and theoretically are going to be operating on into the future, and yet the requirements for qualification for providers are so steep that it's very difficult for me to hire qualified mentors to mentor people on some of my agency contracts because of those qualifications. And again, what we find is that it's almost impossible for outsiders outside of the federal sector to get the necessary experience in the federal sector because of privacy and confidentiality and all kinds of other rules. That, again, we have an aging pool of qualified providers, and it should be a serious concern to all of us. Next slide, please. I'm going to use the Department of Navy's ADR program as my primary example, even though I provide mediators and trainers and some mentors for other federal agencies. The Department of Navy, as far as I know, currently has the only ADR program that trains internal pools of mediators, mentors them, evaluates them, and continues to evaluate them along their years of practice. Many federal programs have ADR, if we can go back, have ADR programs, and they have internal providers. But many of them are trained by a potpourri of training agencies and customers, and they don't have the same kind of mentoring and experiential requirements that the Department of Navy does. And as a result, typically the Department of Navy's ADR program consistently rates in the top 3 for federal agencies, and there are report cards every year of these agencies. And has among the highest resolution rates as well, because I think of the focus on quality control and experiential learning and ongoing oversight. very exciting. In 2020 and 2021, I was able to talk the Department of Navy's ADR program into giving it a chance to try both a virtual conflict coaching training that Tricia and I did for the Department of Navy, and also mediator training. And their mediator training is about a 50-hour mediator training, plus evaluation, plus ongoing co-mediations and mentoring that happens with that. And mind you, this was for an agency that they didn't even have cameras on their computers because of security concerns. And mind you, that these agencies, and I'm doing this for other agencies as well, they don't use Zoom. They use Teams, they use WebEx, they use Skype, they still use GoToMeeting, they use Google Meets. So for me, every day is this constant shift from this platform to that platform to the other platform. And I always feel great when I'm on Zoom. So you've got not only trying to equip students to be able to participate in a virtual training, but then these are also people who have almost no experience at all with participating in those trainings. You have people who are holding cell phones the entire time, and you feel like you've got motion sickness from, watching that. So there's a tremendous need to help participants gain enough sophistication in participating on online platforms. That is also both a huge opportunity, but also a barrier to participation. I think the next slide I've pretty much already commented on, but I do want to get down to the bottom item, and that is that in this particular program, it is inclusive of every protected category you can think of, including age. And so not only do we have digital natives who participate in this program and whom we're training, but we also have people who can't even get online. And then there are users. The question of, should we require people to participate in mediations on which, for instance, I'm mentoring someone to become a mediator when one or two of the participants don't even have connectivity access. So they're participating only telephonically and there are no visuals. And so there are so many questions that this raises as far as making these services accessible, but also how do we train the service provider to handle all of these many variations on what to do. In terms of, I think the next slide, some of this I've already mentioned as well. The last thing that I want to mention in terms of adapting this kind of learning to virtual platforms is, as many people have already said, is that there's so much more to what they need to do in addition to what we would normally have in face-to-face settings. It's virtual ADR is not the same as in-person ADR. There are many advantages to it. And yet there are differences. You lack immediacy cues, for instance. People feel free to say things and share things because they've got the protection of being in their own living room, and they don't have to suffer the backlash of seeing you tomorrow in the workplace. So, there are all kinds of additional considerations that we need to be helping people that we are training to think through before they venture into this big wide world of online mediation. So just to recap a number of things on my final slide. And that is, I think that we need to, when we are engaging in mentoring and training neutrals for this online work, we need to do a better job of identifying and vetting who they are, because they have to also have a level of familiarity with technology or somehow gain that level of familiarity with technology so that it creates possibilities for connection instead of barriers. We've got to think about who is going to be this next generation of ADR providers, at least in the United States government federal ADR context, when it is so difficult for them to gain access to requisite experience. We need to help clients with mastery of web-based platforms. And that is for instance, my federal agency client, as well as all of those who are going to participate in those platforms. We need to educate users and neutrals on how to compensate for changed nonverbal information, the lack of immediacy cues, the changed access to really being able to see crisp, clear facial images and facial expression and eye behavior and tone of voice and all of those kinds of things that are so meaningful in the messages that we need to facilitate. And we need to expand our menu of ADR options beyond mediation to modalities such as conflict coaching that is much more amenable to doing one-on-one instead of in a group on a web-based platform. And I could go on and on, but I'm not going to because we have a lot of other wonderful presenters to listen to today. So thanks for the opportunity to be here and to listen to everyone.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. And, I think your comments about the fact that we kind of in some ways have an aging provider base, suggests again, just a couple of things I want to say quickly and then turn it over to Michael so that he can share with us some of his reflective practice and mentorship ideas. I mentioned earlier that, a lot of the work that I do, my work outside of the university is really in terms of a lot of conflict coaching work, but also a lot of conflict resolution work. And in the polls that we did prior to the forum today, one of the things that came up was that about 25% of participants in this session are really looking as a primary area of practice in conflict education and restorative practice programs, a lot of youth-based initiatives. This is such an amazing opportunity for us to take. And one of the things that we can learn from looking at what's been done in this area is I just want to mention that the research that's been done, as well as the curriculum and the practice that's been done in the areas of K through 12 is a rich resource for us, because they have come up with some really great answers to how this learning process can work and how it can make a difference and how it can scaffold across. Some of my work and some of you are involved in this and know this in the Conflict Resolution Education Initiative that, and shout out and thanks to the JAMS Foundation for consistently being supportive of that work. Looking at those kinds of large scale programs and learning from what we know that work has been done all over the world at this point. The Organization of American States and the UN and WANEP, the West African Network for Peace Education, etc. A lot of things that we can cull from that. Also thinking about the connection with the youth populations and the people who are becoming interested in and members of our field, and media in a different sense, not just as an online learning platform, but the fact that the conflicts they live, the conflicts that they service, the conflicts that they help out in are mediated experiences for them in a way that is not necessarily true for the rest of us. And again, another door open to how we can help think about how media as cause and context affects how we think about learning processes for the youth. And the last comment that I'm going to make and then turn it over to Michael, because we're doing fairly well on time, but we want to make sure everybody has time for sharing what they have to share, is one plug. I was looking for a filter that would let me put a little graduation cap on, but didn't find one. If you have one, send it through. And that is advocating for little r and big R areas of research, right? Those of you who are kind of on the nerd spectrum, as I am, will recognize that this is the Mars Land Rover named Opportunity. So I thought this was a really appropriate picture for this slide. We have an important opportunity for doing more little r research and big R research in our field. To be honest, our field lags in terms of the amount of research that is out there about learning processes, about training efficacy, about mentorship, about the lifelong learning cycles that we can go through. And this is the time to be thinking of how do we want to consider really valuable and efficacious research on both levels that will answer some questions, because as one of my friends and I were once saying, it's almost like we have got a Lamborghini, but it's in the garage. And we know a lot more about the value of the work that we do than many, many other fields and populations know. And that's because they might see the garage, but they don't know what's inside as well as we do. So as we think about online learning processes and how we strategically address these kinds of things, I just want to put in my practitioner and professorial applause for the idea of thinking carefully about how we actually generate knowledge and then get it out there. And I know so many of our presenters have spent a lot of time doing that work. So one of those people, and we've mentioned Michael earlier and everybody knows him, is Michael Lang. So I'm going to turn Michael this over to you so that you can reassume your chair roles for the Mentoring and Case Consultation Subcommittee and introduce us to the presenters.
Thanks.
Sure.
I need to remind myself to take myself off mute. But listen, I thank you to you, Tricia, for all you have done. I could take my entire time with appreciation for your vision and your skill in organizing this, and also to Woody and to Jim, of course. Before I begin, I really want to echo, because I come from the primarily from the practitioner's perspective. And Tricia, everything that you said about research is absolutely vital to us as practitioners. It isn't just for nerds anymore, it's for all of us. So I hope we all get on board with that. And one of the things that I might mention is one of my colleagues on the Mentoring Case Consultation Subcommittee, John Settle, said, "Where's the research about mentoring?" And I spent some time trying to find it, and it doesn't really exist. So we've got a lot of work to do. Well, let's move on, because I'll very quick. I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. This is the group that we assembled to talk about mentoring. 10 of us. You can see we're quite varied in geography. We actually come from 3 continents. And it's a very rich group of people who have a variety of experiences. And this was key to thinking about how we wanted to approach the topic of mentoring. Tricia, if you don't mind, you can go to the next slide. And that is that we didn't try to start with a definition. In fact, what we did was say, let's collect the widest possible array. Let's be eclectic. Let's be visionary and try to identify all the variety of ways in which mentoring is conducted. And that's what we have been doing. I will say, by the way, because I am going to go through these slides fairly quickly, you'll have a copy of these slides, but even more importantly, the members of the subcommittee have pulled together 20 documents that are on the mediate.com task force website that describe a wide range of mentoring practices and programs. And I encourage you to go and read much more. As well, we put together an initial draft report that's about 6 pages, and that identifies where we are today in trying to identify some of the best practices that we could think of for mentoring. We plan to use information from today's forum, as well as further investigation, in order to be able to add to that. Because 2 particular areas that we've not yet completed with best practices have to do with diversity and inclusion, and the other with ethics, and we're going to attend to both. So one of the ways in which we looked at mentoring was dividing it into 2 categories, essentially, and John Settle suggested this idea, and that is that there's really mentoring for professional development, the enrichment of us, the deepening of our knowledge, sharpening of our skills. And then there's we call it mentoring as gatekeeping, which is the sort of process, for example, in which either a state organization, a state program of mediator certification requires mentoring, as it does in Virginia, as one example, or organizations, professional organizations such as the Mediators Institute of Ireland and the International Mediation Institute, both of which require mentoring in order to obtain certification within that professional body. And you'll see some of the other questions that we were thinking of. Next, please. So in terms of professional development, this will come as very little surprise to most people. These are pretty obvious ideas that we have considered. And so we've looked at this range of mentoring type activities that include all the way from, just learning about how to set up a practice to becoming a more competent, effective, resourceful, and resilient practitioner. And we've looked at individual one-on-one, we've looked at groups as part of our investigation. Next, please. And these are some of the ways in which mentoring is done in connection with, in order to be part of a group or an organization or to receive certification. And some of these have to do with state mandated programs, some professional organizations. Two of our subcommittee members, Tricia is going to be talking about the work at CIS. I'm going to be filling in for Howard Herman, who couldn't be here today, to talk about the work at the Northern District Court in San Francisco. We've looked at communities of practice, and also there are group mentoring. I, in particular, either facilitate or co-facilitate 7 monthly mentoring groups, one of which is with Susan Terry, who will be presenting, and another with Woody. Next, please. So these are some of the threshold questions that we're thinking that mentors and mentees need to be asking themselves. They seem obvious, don't they? They're pretty basic, but they are fundamental. And if you don't ask these questions and answer them, it's very difficult to have a rich, full, and satisfying mentoring experience. We'll go to the next, if you would, please. Thanks. So right now, in our interim report, we identified 3 basic areas that we're trying to come up with best practices. And you'll see some of the best practices listed in blue. But the basic areas are setting goals and expectation. We call setting the stage. And these are part of how, and for those of us who do mediation, which is almost every one of us, think about an agreement to mediate. It's very much the same kind of thing: roles, responsibility, goals, expectations. And then we're going to be talking about what are the mentor's roles and responsibilities, because this is one of the really key pieces. What does a mentor do? Doesn't just sit and proffer advice or help somebody think through a problem. There's a great deal more sophistication to that role. And we also think it's important to identify what are the mentee's responsibilities, because they don't just come in as tabula rasa, as blank slates. They have needs, expectations, they have goals, and very importantly, they need to be able to adopt the learner's mindset. So I'm going to leave us here. 3 of my colleagues, Tricia, John Suttle, and Susan Terry, are going to be talking about their individual experiences with mentoring. Thanks very much, Tricia.
Thank you, Michael. And just to note that we have a couple of other things that we were going to be trying to post in chat, but we encourage and invite all of you to be posting resources in chat as we continue our conversations and listen to the presenters. Patricia.
Hello, and thanks, Tricia. It's a big honor to be invited to be part of this forum. I was not ready to talk with my picture next to me. And so, Michael, I hope it's okay that I share the screen with the flyer of the program where I work. And Tricia, would that be all right?
There you go.
All right.
Marvelous. Technology is great.
So I really hope that my humble presence here inspires mediators anywhere in the planet to create a reflective practice group or to join an existing one. It is incredible to see so many of my friends from South America here. Even though I'm located in California, I'm originally from Argentina. And I know that many of my neighbors in Brazil are here. So, oi. I'll do my best to give justice to the privilege that I've been given by having the opportunity to learn from amazing mentors and to share this practice with my team at the Bar Association of San Francisco. The program is called the Conflict Intervention Service. My first experience discovering reflective practice was at the 2019 ACR conference in Tucson, Arizona. And there, Jennifer Nauer debriefed my story from a case that I had mediated a while back. I was stunned by how attuned she was with what I was describing, and I loved hearing the questions that she very wisely was asking throughout the session. Even though that mediation had happened a while in the past, certain pieces were still lingering in my head. And it was very clear that I had the answers in myself all along, but I needed the guidance, such as Jennifer's proper guidance, in order to help me figure out what those answers were. I guess I'm a curious person, and that would be one of the main skills and reasons why I became a mediator in the first place. But I saw that this practice of reflection could be a way for me to utilize my curiosity to learn how to ask the right questions in order to help others discover their own answers, the same way that I had experienced. And so I had to ask myself also, what does reflection mean to me? And I realized that it was like having a mirror to see my own learning. And that's what I keep doing. So I'm grateful to have been included as a participant at one of Susan Terry and Michael Lang's reflective practice groups. We get together with other mediators from different parts of the US and with experience in different areas of professional work. And although these monthly meetings happen online, Michael and Susan created connectivity and trust among the participants, which is what helps us to show up authentically and with all our vulnerabilities. And there we share our cases for reflection and we learn from each other. I remember how during the initial meetings, Michael and Susan were the only facilitators of those meetings, but gradually they extended their facilitative capacities for everyone in the group. They're still our mentors, and they constantly give great feedback to all those sharing cases and those debriefing. But they give us the freedom to discover what it's like to be the debriefer by having the experience to doing it. It's an incredibly valuable resource to have a space for support to discuss those puzzling moments from our work. Now, the challenge was how I was going to replicate and to bring this mentoring practice to my team, especially when being conscious of me being such a beginner compared to the many years of experience that both Michael and Susan have. My work is as I'm a mediator and administrator of the Conflict Intervention Service at the Bar Association of San Francisco. There we offer mediation, coaching, and negotiation services for any housing and commercial lease conflicts in San Francisco through a funded program that was created originally to prevent homelessness and now has been extended to commercial leases as well. We have a core group of staff mediators, but also a larger roster of independent contractor mediators with different cultural and professional backgrounds. Some in law, others in mental health and education. And of course, in our diversity, we bring our language capacities as well. And so a colleague of mine, Ismail Rahimian, first introduced the idea of incorporating this reflective practice for our team. And it was focusing on best practices for reflecting on our shared work and the space for us to explore why our interventions work or don't, and to share our surprising or unsettled situations for debrief. We conducted our initial meetings and then transferred the responsibility to me. I've been leading our reflective practice together with my dear colleague and friend Hansa Patel for a year now. Hansa is a mindfulness teacher in addition to being an attorney mediator. And in order to ease participants into arriving wholeheartedly, our meetings begin with a meditation. But the main difference between our group and the one that Michael and Susan lead is that we may know some of the clients in cases that we discuss, and that we continue working closely, sometimes in the same cases. Certainly, all the work that we do is in the same landlord-tenant arenas. But we keep showing up with a beginner's mind, with immense respect for each other, and we strictly maintain confidentiality and then never bring up any discussed topics outside of the reflective practice sessions. Even when we're meeting with colleagues or others, certainly when they haven't participated in those sessions. Participants are reminded to remain free of judgment and to refrain from providing advice, nor comparing what they would be doing in other situations. So having the opportunity to meet monthly, first in person and during the pandemic remotely, we were able to build a trusting, sacred space to learn from each other, and not only helping us to become better mediators, but strengthening our program's capacity to provide higher services. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Amazing work that you're doing. Look forward to hearing more about it and getting more resources for that. So thank you very much. Susan, let me ask you, as you step in, wanted to know, do you want your PowerPoint pulled back up, or would you rather simply talk through the points, whichever your preference is?
Yes, pull it up, please.
Got it. Okay.
So before we see that, a perspective, a lens through which I see what is the field is and mentoring, what's happened. I entered the field when it was very common for people to say, mediators are born, they're not made. You can't train a mediator. My original training was with Bill Lincoln, who was, of course, one of the early folks that put together training. So, you know, we started there. We came through a period. Then, like also, a few years ago, I did a workshop at a conference with Colin Rule. It was on the use of online mediation in family cases. And we had a room full of people, at least half of them were there, to let us know how wrong we were, that we couldn't do it. And then it became clear that it was a good idea, and it was necessary in many instances. And we ended up with a lot of fans, a lot of questions, et cetera. So watching these transitions and watching it move smoothly from you can't train a mediator, you can't do this, you can't do that, and moving along is really, really heartening. Picking up on what Michael said, next slide, Tricia, looking at yeah, okay, so this got funny, this slide got changed. So the definition I work with, two definitions I work with on mentoring is the welcoming and supporting of those who we anticipate will be valuable members of the field. That includes all of the things that Michael had said, keeping it broad. And then the one I particularly love is it's the helping our future competition to be well-trained and prepared to take our place. One of the things that I want to say that I think is most important, and I believe that we'll find it gets borne out over time, is that mentoring begins with the training. When you do your first training, you begin to establish a relationship that says, I see who you are. You come to this training and I see you. You're a person who comes with experience and knowledge. You've been doing conflict things in your work, etc. You're not a blank slate that I'm writing on. This is a partnership in your learning, and hopefully I'm learning too. And as the trainer, I'm drawing on that experience and paralleling it, and it helps you to transition then into the mentor role at a later time. So this is not, training is one thing. Now we're going to do this whole different thing, which is mentorship. So it carries a continuity between that. One of the things that I have found is most important is the understanding of what it is that we're doing in any situation. As Michael said, people come to us for different reasons. They're new in the field, or they are just wanting to kind of get a freshening up, a new kind of perspective, or they may be moving into a new arena of work, and so need some mentoring there. So we have a different perspective on each of our roles as mentors. So it's the job description that becomes terribly important. Hard for me to tell whether to switch slides or not. These look different. So if you would just go ahead and switch and we'll see what we've got. So here's the thing that I think is tremendously important as we look at mentoring. Hit and miss mentoring without a plan is likely to leave holes in people's development, particularly when people are new in the field. Their tendency, folks want to kind of bop around, do some of this, some of that, and I understand they want to explore different things or they want to work with different people. But what is their trajectory? What is their long plan? What are their strengths and weaknesses, and how do they keep building on that and developing it? And part of our role is to assist them into looking forward to a practice with a lifelong learning process. Okay, you don't quite have a handle on this. So over the next 10 years, how about you grow into that? So we're not doing a one-shot thing. We're helping people think about the larger plan. All right, let's see the next one. All right, so we use different modalities depending on where people are coming into this and depending on what their strengths are. I do mentoring in a variety of different ways. I've done it a long time, formally and informally, with former students and trainees. I'm a case supervisor in the Vermont Superior Court Parent Coordination Program. And in that program, people spend about 2 years with me doing what we call close supervision. For every 3 hours they work with a client, they check in with me, which is an opportunity to learn more things and, you know, what would this be like if it was a different scenario and so forth. I review every document that they send out to the court or to attorneys, et cetera. And that is that serves somewhat of a gatekeeper function, as we were talking about earlier. I have also created a thing called the Orion program, which is turning out to be important in terms of mentoring, because what happens is after people get some of their basic fundamental training, let's just in the field of family, for example, and this could be true in any other, one of the first things they want to do is get their experience. You know, how do you get on a roster, or how do you get your name? This is the sort of thing that Mary was talking about with, you know, how do you get enough expertise in the field? And people couldn't get their casework to get on our state roster. You know, they could just start mediating, but that's kind of iffy, and they could practice without any kind of supervision. So we created Orion, and that is a program that when people have had their basic core training that's necessary, which essentially is 40 hours of a basic training or introduction, and then they have had their, what ends up usually being 60 hours of divorce training, so a total of 100 hours, you can enter Orion and contract to do whatever you need done. So for example, if you want your experience with 30 hours working in family mediation, you could start working with a mentor. You will start out as an observer. You will move to a next level with having some participation and some responsibility. Then you can move to being a co-mediator, and then you can move to being a solo mediator. You'll have a primary mentor in Orion, but you can use any of the Orion case supervisors and or mentors and move around with there, but we will keep a collective portfolio on you. So what you're working on and have contracted to do, we can fulfill no matter who you're working with. Having said that, I will say mentoring is dependent upon the contract that you make between the mentee and the mentor. What are they needing done? Does it match up with what the mentor does? And what is your goal for this designated period of time? We may have a last slide here. Then go on to another one and one more, I think. Yeah. That's it. We can't take it with us. Let's leave it with somebody, leave it in competent hands. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Michael, would you like to say a word in terms of introduction of John? We have John's bio here, but I know that in your conversations with me about the importance of the Virginia Supreme Court Mediator Mentor Program, it's something that really deserves to be highlighted. See whether
Yep, I got it. I got the
Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. Yeah, John will probably say some of these things as part of his presentation, but I really think, John and a number of other people in Virginia were instrumental in creating a mentorship program that started as a pilot program in some community mediation centers, and then developed into a program that has been adopted by the Virginia Supreme Court. And it occurs in the process of certifying mediators. And John has been one of the important mentors in that program. And he's going to be talking about his experience as well as about the program. Take it away, John.
Okay. First of all, I know in the limits of time, I don't want to gild the lily of some of the fine comments we've already had here, including from Michael and from others. So I just want to highlight a couple of things. Mentoring is a developmental adult learning process. That's whether you're using it with apprentices at the front end, you're using it with people who are seeking development in the middle of their careers, or even if you're using it to do some kind of corrective practice. For example, occasionally in Virginia, because of complaints, there have been people that have been referred mediators to mentoring and have been assigned a mentor to work with them to correct, if you will, some of the issues that had been complained about. And that links back to ethics, which we won't get into too much here. But there is an ethical dimension to this that relates to it. So it is highly developmental, no matter where it is. And one of the things that I think that makes it particularly valuable is that so much of what we do otherwise in our developmental processes are groups processes. Generally, our training is a group process. Much of our reflective practice training is done in groups. And here we have a very individualized opportunity to have a mentor work closely and individually with individuals at any level. And that's kind of a unique thing in this overall process of bringing mediators along. And I think that that's an important thing to recognize. The other thing I want to emphasize, because we haven't talked about it too much, is that you can't be a mentor just because you're a good mediator. I mean, in Virginia, we require that you have a certain amount of experience, essentially at least 4 years experience as a mediator. But then in addition, you have to complete a training. The training isn't very long. Right now, I think it's half a day. But I think one of the things we need to reflect on is that being a good mediator doesn't mean that you're a good trainer. It doesn't mean that you're a good teacher. So it's really important for us to begin thinking about what it is we want mediators to know. It's about learning how to be a teacher and how to be a coach. Those things kind of combine together. I'm not going to go too much further than that because the materials we have there are available to you. There's some very practical things. There's a list of techniques for before the mediation, during the mediation, after the mediation, each of which is a vital step in mentoring. And I will tell you that it isn't just for Virginia. For example, I do some work for EEOC's WISE program, which is where we bring in an evaluative form of mediation for federal EEO cases pending at the formal level just before they go to a hearing. And that's expanded substantially. And I have mentored some other people being brought in as neutrals in that program using essentially these same principles. So that's basically all I want to add to what has already been said. There's a lot of material there for you to look at and take away and use. A lot of it kind of parallels in some ways. I was interested to learn today some of the things that are being done in New York. It does kind of point up that in a broad sense, we're kind of headed in the same direction, but there's a lot of room for more work. And I really do think as a person who's practiced this now, I'm a true believer in this stuff. It really is a way to help mediators at the beginning, in the middle of their careers, and later if they get into trouble, have an opportunity to grow and develop. So that's as much as I'm going to say. And I'll turn it back to Michael to add any further things you want to talk about on mentoring. Michael, you unmuted?
I'm right here, John. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Tricia, shall I go ahead with what I was going to say about Howard Herman?
You know, in the interest of time, maybe we should go to the panel conversation and make sure that Woody has a chance to kind of lead us through that, and then add some of Howard's documents in terms of online.
I'll just say one thing, that is that to know a lot more about the program that Howard ran at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, where he had 200 volunteer mediators who participated in monthly reflective practice groups. I had a wonderful hour-long conversation with Howard that's recorded, and I'm going to post it's on YouTube, and I'm going to post the link to that conversation. Thanks, Tricia.
Great, thank you, Michael, because that's a fantastic resource, and you know, again, an amazing program that he's doing. One of the things that we wanted to do is to invite the panel to say a little bit more, and many of you have said so many things that pertain to the online technology and platforms in terms of these learning processes, but to really have a panel conversation about, does online matter? If so, how, right? I mean, what are the kind of ways that it really promotes learning in the ways that you have discussed as important, and what are some of the challenges with that as well? So I'm going to turn this over to Woody to facilitate in his wonderful Woody way in terms of the conversation. And what we'll do is, instead of doing breakout rooms at the end, which we had talked about earlier, we're just going to go ahead and in the post forum survey, we'll add some of those questions on visioning, and you can give your thoughts and contributions at that point in time. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and Woody, let you invite the panelists to kind of share their thoughts on these questions.
I can't improve on that. Panel, start sharing.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, Mary, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, John. I was just going to say that as someone who has just completed delivering 4 8-hour days of advanced mentor mediator training for a federal client, don't ever do 8-hour days of virtual training. No matter how much synchronous and asynchronous learning you're doing, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. This is a client, they had 2 cohorts, 2 days each, but I'll tell you, you really got to think about the learning and the pacing of the learning. And I'll just say, please think about that, everybody.
So Mary, what you're saying is that we need to take a real look at curriculum design.
Yes.
And a different look as how we do it online, and build on our in-person experience, but not be tethered to it. And
Exactly. The other thing is, one of the fabulous things about online education is breakout room. Oh, they're just wonderful to facilitate simulations.
In preparing for this work, people need the training to know how to use those rooms, to do it seamlessly, because it isn't natural. We're not born with it chromosomally. Next on the panel, you have so much to say.
I just wanted to add, John Settle, on the mentoring. The nice thing about mentoring is because it's individualized, we don't have quite some of the technical issues with virtuality. I mean, we can go into a Zoom conference face-to-face if we don't choose to do it by telephone. And I like to do that because I do like seeing people and seeing, as Mary said earlier, how their facial expressions change and all that. But it's very easy to do one-on-one. And so the virtual setting doesn't really change much about what we do as mentors, but at the same time, it provides an easy opportunity for the individualized kind of thing without some of the issues of confidentiality and caucuses and how do you deal with 20 people and those kinds of things that we have problems with.
John, so how do you make people comfortable if they're already anxious about their own development? How do you make them comfortable to be able to expose themselves as they see it in a mentoring situation?
That's a very good question. And that's part of what goes beyond just mediation to taking training in mentoring. It has a lot to do with just how you introduce yourself, talk with the person about what they want, make it centered on them and not on you as the mentor. You know, just like as mediators, we don't want to center things on us, it's about the parties. And by bringing them in to make them a student-centered process and talk about what they need and what they want to talk about in their experiences. And for example, in mentoring apprentices, oftentimes what we hear is, wow, that mediator didn't do it anything like what I thought I learned in training. So, you know, we have to give them opportunities to explore all of that. And those are their opportunities. So it becomes, the answer is simply being centered on them, what they want, how they're feeling about it, and putting them at ease. And there's little tricks you have as mentors with that. I won't go into it.
So Daniel, when you're mentoring and working with community citizens, people who aren't necessarily professionals, what are the other insights and skills that are necessary to making that possible?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Woody. And I was thinking a little bit about what Mary was sharing earlier as it relates to this, because you know, the community volunteer comes in with a different agenda than the aspiring professional frequently. And I think tapping into that motivation is so critical. But I think, you know, when we think about the mentorship at a community mediation center, it's hand in glove with a quality assurance mentality. And that might be a differentiating factor, because when you have quality assurance as one of your main goals, it's
what
not
is quality assurance, Daniel?
Pardon?
What you mean by that?
Quality assurance means we have a standard of practice, perhaps a mediation model that we all follow to have consistency, so every client gets the same type of service. And what we want is people to be practicing in the same way, in the way they've been taught, and not deviating from that. So for instance, if we're a center that practices out of a facilitative mindset, we're not, even if you're an attorney, you're not going to be doing case evaluation during that. that's a no. And so we want that consistency for clients. So we establish a standard of practice, and then we feedback and debrief according to that. Did you do what is kind of expected in the role in the way our center practices? And I think that makes it a little less open-ended than what, say, John was sharing, which is, I want to be a self-directed learner, and more about how do we make sure to bring people to a level of competency that's consistent.
So I'd like to ask Jim's question, which I think is incredibly important. And if any of the people who are attending want a question, just send a direction to me privately, and then I'll know you're ready, because I won't be able to see everybody's hands go up. And Jim, why don't you ask the question? Because I think it coming from you will be important about group or individual.
Ultimately, I'm trying to wonder about whether there would be some concept of a model mentorship relationship, or models. It doesn't have to be one. And along those lines, my imagination is that some measure of the ideal mentorship relationship is individualized to make it safe and private and confidential. But there may also be special types of learning that take place within a group or cohort, different quality of learning, if only being heartened by the struggles of others also, and that there's a certain efficiency, economy, and ability to leverage the time of the best and the brightest if they can work with groups and not just individuals. So I'd love to hear any comments about what would the ideal mentorship program be? Is it individual, is it group, or is it some measure of each?
And Jim, can I ask you a question? Do you believe the online makes a big difference in that? So in your idea of the ideal group mentoring situation, is online off the table for you with that?
In terms of doing the mentorship?
Yeah.
To be honest with you, my operational thinking now is basically that all of our communications are going to be online. I saw a very compelling, Jeff Sharp did a survey of other civil commercial mediators, and importantly, of their clients. And while about half of the civil commercial mediators said they anticipated moving on exclusively online, 70% of the clients were more attracted to the online. Well, why? It's so damn efficient and affordable and flexible, and we don't have to get in cars and park and get into disrespectful waiting rooms and then conference, and I'm sure that there will continue to be a good measure of face-to-face for those that want it. It's a wonderful thing, but particularly for mediation, education, and training. And we think about the friction and the cost of historically training people. So maybe if we're doing a training in-person NLP, where we're looking for literally behavioral cues, you would want to be live. But absent that, I just imagine that our development, even if our services will be face-to-face, I think our education and development is going to be primarily online because of access, convenience, affordability, and critically in bringing services to underserved communities.
We have so much to explore here. We have a few minutes. I'm going to turn it to Michael Lang for 1 to 1.5 minutes, and directly back to Tricia, who can close it for us with her vision for the future.
I will keep it very, very quick. To what Daniel was saying. One of the things that's really critical about mentoring is you can help somebody match what they believe with what they actually do. And that's really important in terms of someone's growth and development. I do agree also with Jim. I think that our subcommittee is likely to come up with some ideas for how we can both do this programmatically and groups and work on it as John does individually. And lastly, just point out, Howard, had he been here, would have indicated that he has just begun reflective practice groups with a group in Brazil using Zoom Translate and in India. I do groups in England and in Ireland and have participants in Canada and South Africa as well, none of which would be possible unless we had some kind of a group forum like this one. Thanks, Woody. And thanks, Tricia.
Okay, so Tricia, 3 minutes is not going to at all be sufficient, but let us have a chance at your vision, at your dreams. And what do you want to leave us with?
That's a big opportunity. Thank you, Woody. First of all, I would say that my vision is that we start really developing mentorship programs that are cross-generational in different practice contexts in this field, because I really believe that the people who understand the online experience better than anyone are the people who live it 24/7. And with all due respect to all of us here, I don't think many of us fall into that category. And I think there are great opportunities there. I also think that one of the aspects of the vision is that we have more of these conversations. You know, it's been so enriching to listen to people that we know, all wonderful experts in the field, bringing up things about how mentorship and experiential training works in their context, and seeing people with the aha moments and, you know, the things that they are adding into chat. So I would say that these should be ways that we perpetuate learning communities, kind of learning communities for ourselves on these issues. So I want to just turn it over to Jim to kind of close us completely out, but just mention there will be a kind of a post survey that comes out to you, not an evaluation of the session, but just thoughts about more thinking about some of these questions. And just again, a thank you, Woody and Jim, to putting this together. A really wonderful opportunity. I appreciate it.
And Woody, why don't I actually have you offer any closing thoughts you might want to do first?
Just take a moment and think about the quality of these presentations and how seamlessly they were woven in the PowerPoints. And just looking at our time, they were absolutely practiced, thoughtful, and you can't pay to get that. And what we did is nobody paid for it. Everyone on this task force was a volunteer. No money going in, no money going out. That doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be dedicated research and dedicated program evaluation and replication that we will be looking at in the future, and that will require some funding. This task force is not intended to do the work. It's intended to ask the questions for the work to be done over the next few decades. Jim?
Good. I will be sending out a link to a comment and evaluation forum. You'll likely get that Monday or Tuesday. I want to mention we have another forum, also very fascinating, Beyond Mediation, interdisciplinary collaborative practice, coaching, and limited scope representation with Woody and Brian Galbraith being the primary host next Friday, same bat time, same bat place, although different bat link. You know, I just wanted to mention one other thing that I find wonderfully fortuitous, and that is how damn green all of this online mediation and online mediation training is. We're not forcing people to take off work or get childcare. We're not forcing them to get in their car and drive and park and heat buildings and cool buildings and all these other things. And because of these efficiencies and appropriateness for the future, I really think we need to be thinking about serving populations that historically have not been able to take advantage of brick and mortar services. And that really is where the next big opportunities are. I couldn't be enjoying these forums more. It's a miracle that we're able to come together, have these conversations. Please know we continue to welcome all ideas. We will ultimately be developing a report with recommendations for the future, but we know that's just a first set of steps moving forward. Thank you so much for taking part. We look forward to seeing you next Friday, hopefully, and additionally online. Thank you so very much.